Philby read the memo with mounting, if hidden, horror. Volkov's allusion to the Soviet spy running a counterintelligence section in London could only refer to himself. Even if Volkov did not know his identity, he had promised to hand over copies of the material provided to Moscow, which would soon be traced back to him. The spies Volkov threatened to uncover in the Foreign Office must be Guy Burgess, now working in the news department, and Donald Maclean, first secretary to the British Embassy in Washington. This lone defector had enough information to break up the entire Cambridge spy chain, expose the inner workings of Soviet intelligence, and destroy Philby himself. Philby stalled. Telling C that the Volkov approach was something of the greatest importance, he would ponder the memo overnight, he said, and report back in the morning. That evening I worked late, Philby wrote many years later. The situation seemed to call for urgent action of an extracurricular nature. The insouciant tone is misleading. Philby was close to panic. He arranged a hasty meeting with Kurtenschild and told him what had happened. Max tried to calm him in language that sounds like one Englishman discussing a cricket match with another. "Don't worry, old man. We've seen a lot worse. The score will be settled in our favour." Philby should prevaricate, said Crotenshield, and try to control the situation. That evening, British radio interceptors picked up, but failed to attach any significance to, a sudden surge in coded radio messages passing from London to Moscow, followed by another increase in traffic between Moscow and Istanbul. The next morning, Philby was back in C's office full of enthusiasm, since any hint of reluctance would look deeply suspicious if matters came to the crunch. Someone, fully briefed, should be sent out to take charge of the case on the spot, he said, with the task of meeting Volkov, bedding him down with his wife in one of our safe houses in Istanbul, and spiriting him away, with or without connivance of the Turks, to British-occupied Egypt. C agreed. In fact, he had met just the man for the job at White's Club the night before, Brigadier Sir Douglas Roberts, Head of Security Intelligence Middle East, SIME, based in Cairo, who happened to be in London on leave. Roberts was an experienced intelligence officer and a veteran anti-Bolshevik. Born in Odessa to an English father and Russian mother, he spoke Volkov's language fluently. Indeed, he was the only Russian-speaking intelligence officer in either the Middle East or London, which says much about MI6's state of preparation for the Cold War. Roberts would be able to smuggle Volkov out of Istanbul with ease, and Philby knew it. All he could do was hope that his work the night before would bear fruit before Roberts got his teeth into the case. Once again, Philby's uncanny good fortune intervened. Brigadier Roberts was a brave man, a veteran of the First World War, but he had one fear: flying. Indeed, so extreme was his aviophobia that his job description explicitly excused him from having to fly anywhere. When asked to head to Istanbul at once and to take over the Volkov case, he barked, "Don't you read my contract? I don't fly." The obvious replacement for Roberts was Nicholas Elliot. From Bern he could reach Istanbul, his old stomping ground, in a matter of hours. He had done a fine job in extricating Vermeeren 2 years earlier and had excellent contacts in Turkey. He even appears to have met Volkov at some point during his stint in Istanbul. But Elliot, precisely because of his suitability, was the last person Philby wanted to handle the case. For once, instead of delicately planting an idea on the boss and waiting for him to believe he had coined it, Philby directly intervened and suggested that C send him to Turkey to extract Volkov in person. Mengiz agreed. With obvious relief at this bureaucratic problem solved, Philby now gave the impression of busily making preparations while dragging his feet as slowly as possible. He first underwent a crash course in wireless coding to ensure he could bypass the penetrated embassy systems, and then dawdled for 3 more days. When his plane finally took off for Cairo, it was diverted to Tunis, causing further delay. He was still en route when the Turkish consulate in Moscow issued visas for 2 Soviet diplomatic couriers travelling to Istanbul. Philby finally arrived in Turkey on the 26th of September 1945, 22 days after Volkov's initial contact. The city was looking particularly beautiful in the late summer sun, but Philby grimly reflected that if he failed to prevent Volkov's defection, this might be the last memorable summer I was destined to enjoy. When Reed asked him why MI6 had not sent someone sooner, Philby lied blandly. "Sorry, old man, it would have interfered with the leave arrangements." Reed later found himself pondering the inexplicable delays and evasions of Philby's visit, but at the time the Foreign Office man held his tongue. "I thought he was just irresponsible and incompetent." The following Monday, with Philby standing over him, Chantry Page picked up the telephone, dialed the number of the Soviet consulate and asked for the operator. asked the operator for Konstantin Volkov. Instead, he was put through to the Consul General. Page phoned again. This time, after a lengthy pause, the telephone was answered by someone who claimed to be Volkov, but who spoke good English, which Volkov did not. "It wasn't Volkov," said Page. "I know Volkov's voice perfectly well. I've spoken to him dozens of times." The third call got no further than the telephone operator. "She said he was out," complained Page. "A minute ago, she put me on to him." Page's face was a study in puzzlement. Silently, Philby rejoiced. The next day, Page called the Soviet consulate again. "I asked for Volkov, and the girl said Volkov's in Moscow." Then there was a sort of scuffle and a slam, and the line went dead. Finally, Page marched over to the Soviet consulate in person and returned enraged. "It's no bloody good. I can't get any sense out of that madhouse. Nobody's ever heard of Volkov." Philby was privately triumphant. The case was dead, and so by this point was Volkov. The two diplomatic couriers, hitmen, dispatched by Moscow Center, had worked with crisp efficiency. A few hours earlier, two figures bandaged from head to foot were seen being loaded onto a Soviet transport aircraft on stretchers and heavily sedated. In Moscow, Volkov was taken to the torture cells of the Lubyanka, where under brutal interrogation he confessed that he had intended to reveal the identities of hundreds of Soviet agents. Volkov and his terrified wife Zoya were then executed. Philby later reflected that the episode had been a very narrow squeak, the closest he had yet come to disaster. As for Volkov, Philby dismissed the Russian as a nasty piece of work who deserved what he got. Konstantin Volkov left no traces, no photograph, no file in the Russian archives, no evidence about whether his motives were mercenary, personal, or ideological. Neither his family nor that of his wife have ever emerged from the darkness of Stalin's state. He had been right to assume that his relatives were doomed. Volkov was not merely liquidated, he was expunged. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark, and welcome to another Corker, another non-fiction Corker. And this book was absolutely fantastic. I'll try and bring up the cover for you so you can see what book it is I'm talking about. It is, of course, in relation to this fantastic event that I'm hosting. I say fantastic rather modestly, but I'm having a great time doing it. And I've got a whole bunch of wonderful co-hosts who, of course, will be listed below, which is that of Dr No-vember, a celebration of espionage, fiction and non-fiction from the Russian Revolution of 1917 through to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. And this particular corker is Ben McIntyre's A Spy Among Friends, Kim Philby and the Great Betrayal. It's remarkable. I mean, it's a story I think a lot of people, even with a passing interest in 20th century history, Cold War history, British history, anything to do with espionage and the Cold War, would know something about. But this really gives the in-depth story, and it reads so fantastically well. I mean, it could be pretty much a novel by one of the greats like John le Carré. In fact, John le Carré does write the afterword to this book, as you can see at the bottom there, and that in itself is well worth reading because it's personal reminiscences between John le Carré and Nicholas Elliot, who was Kim Philby's best friend, or at least he thought he was Kim Philby's best friend. Who really knows with someone like Kim Philby. If you don't know who Kim Philby was, he was probably one of the greatest spies of the 20th century who worked for MI6. However, all the time he was working for MI6, he was really working for the KGB. So, yeah, it's quite shocking stuff, really, and it's shocking how he was able to pretty much get every plum job that such an agent would need to be successful. It's quite remarkable, and even more remarkable that he's able to do this for, remain undetected for a period of 30 odd years, primarily due to the fact that he was considered to be the right sort of chap and couldn't possibly be a communist. But McIntyre spins the yarn extremely well. It's very, very engaging and a massive page turner, and I can't recommend it enough. So do check out A Spy Among Friends by Ben McIntyre. Thank you very much, everybody. Let me know in the comments below if you've read this or if you're reading anything else espionage related for Dr No-vember. And if not, why not? Take care, everybody, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye for now.